Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the soot-smudged world of the medieval peasant. The hearth fire is a dull red glow. Your breath hangs like mist in the chill air of the early dawn. Somewhere just outside your cottage walls, a rooster is absolutely convinced he's the main character of the village, and he's crowing accordingly. You lie curled under a rough woolen blanket that smells vaguely of sheep smoke and the turnips you stored under the bed last week. Around you, your entire family is still half asleep, your spouse snoring softly, two kids curled like commas under patchwork cloaks, and a grandmother who's somehow still awake and muttering a prayer. The sun hasn't yet risen, but your day is about to. You groan, stretch, and immediately regret both actions. Your muscles feel like someone stuffed straw into your joints instead of your mattress. Welcome to peasant life. No lords, no ladies, and certainly no luxury. Just hard work, honest dirt, and if you're lucky, a bit of gossip by the fire. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comments. Where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You sit up slowly, the cold stone floor biting your feet through thin, holey socks. You grope for your tunic in the dark, nearly knocking over a wooden bowl full of onions. You pull the tunic over your head. It smells like last week's stew and smoke. Which makes sense. It was last week's stew and smoke. There's no privacy here. Your cottage is a one-room affair with walls of wattle and daub, and a roof that does its best to keep the rain out sometimes. There's a smoke hole in the ceiling, and if you crane your neck, you can see the faintest promise of blue in the sky. Outside, the coals in the hearth have long since burned down. You kick a few embers with a stick and add a scrap of wood from the dwindling pile. No flint and steel needed. You've been keeping this fire alive for months. If it goes out, you're borrowing a flame from the neighbors again. And nobody forgets whose fire went out. You stumble toward the door, lift the wooden latch, and step outside. Your boots, well, they used to be boots squelched slightly in the damp mud. The village is still half asleep. Smoke curls from one or two chimneys, and a thin layer of mist clings to the thatch like a blanket that won't quite tuck in. A dog trots past you with more energy than any living thing has a right to this early, probably off to bark at a tree for no reason. Chickens mutter to themselves nearby. You're not sure if they're plotting revolution or just arguing over pecking order. Either way, they seem disappointed you're awake. Back inside, your family begins to stir. The little ones whimper at the cold. Your spouse sits up, scratches their head, and mutters something unrepeatable about the rooster. You pass them a cracked cup with some leftover ale. It's safer than the water and warmer than the stream. Breakfast will be reheated porridge, a piece of barley bread so hard you could use it as a weapon, and maybe, just maybe, a scrap of cheese if the rats didn't get to it first. You eat sitting on a three-legged stool, chewing slowly, your eyes fixed on the wooden beam that always leaks when it rains. Outside, the rooster is still yelling. He is, perhaps, the most consistent force in your life. The morning quiet is broken by distant voices, other peasants heading to the fields, calling to one another across foggy paths. You sigh, drain your cup, and steel yourself for another day. Because like clockwork, the village reeve will be by soon to remind you which field belongs to the Lord, and which tiny corner you're allowed to farm for yourself. You slip into your over-tunic, grab your woven basket and your dull hoe, and kiss your children goodbye, one of whom is now attempting to eat the rest of the cheese rind whole. The dog follows you to the edge of the yard, then thinks better of it and goes back to sleeping in the woodpile. There's no such thing as weekends here. No sleeping in, no paid time off. You are tied to the land, to the rhythm of the seasons, and to the whims of weather, lords, and livestock. Historians still argue whether this lifestyle was crushingly bleak, or just a rough version of community living. Probably both. But for you, it's not philosophy. It's your day every day. Still, not everything is drudgery. There's a strange peace in the predictability of it all. The way you can tell the time by the angle of the sun through the trees. The way the thatch smells different when it rains. The fact that when you pass your neighbor old Tom on the path, he nods exactly once, every single time, as though bound by some secret peasant code. So you head down the lane, passing your neighbors, stepping over puddles, avoiding the slippery patch by the smithy. You have work to do. Because dawn is here, the day has begun, and this medieval life muddy, messy, and mildly ridiculous is yours. The morning mist clings to your shoulders as you make your way toward the fields, the path winding between cottage fences, livestock pens, and the occasional suspicious goose. That particular goose Geraldine, as your neighbor calls her, has pecked no fewer than 4 children and 1 grown man this week. She eyes you now with open disdain, and you wisely cross to the other side. You walk past the village blacksmith's workshop where the clanging has just begun. It's a comforting rhythm metal on metal, with the occasional swear word thrown in when something doesn't go right. You wave at the smith's apprentice, a lanky teen with soot-streaked cheeks and a talent for making nails slightly crooked. He grins at you, revealing a missing front tooth that disappeared during last month's drunken May Day dance. A fine memory, if you recall correctly, involving too much ale and a maypole-related mishap. By the time you reach the communal fields, the sun has risen above the tree line. It's a weak, watery light just enough to see the patchwork of soil and frost-covered grass. Your plot is in the western corner of the Lord's domain, which is fancy talk for he owns everything and you get to borrow a bit of it if you're good. The reeve is already there, his face pinched like he's just swallowed a lemon. He's got a list in one hand and a stick in the other. Not for beating, thank goodness, just for pointing. You nod respectfully. He barely glances at you, but mutters something about yesterday's ditch digging being a bit wonky. You resist the urge to comment on his own posture. Today's task? Turn over the soil in preparation for spring planting. The ground is cold, heavy, and utterly uninterested in being dug. You set to work with your hoe, your breath rising in little clouds, each stroke a gentle reminder that your arms are not, in fact, made of iron. Fun fact, most medieval peasants didn't actually work every single day of the year. There were feast days, saints' days, and Sundays off. In total, it might add up to over 80 rest days a year more than some modern jobs offer. Of course, those days were often filled with compulsory church attendance, public fasts, or mandated revelry. And before you get too excited about revelry, remember that ale was weak, dancing was muddy, and nobody owned socks with elastic. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants were hopelessly overworked or cleverly optimized for seasonal rhythms. You decide not to weigh in. You've got mud on your boots and a crick in your back, and your hoe is stuck in a particularly stubborn patch of clay. You pause for a moment, standing upright and stretching your spine until it sounds like someone stepping on old wood. Around you, other peasants do the same, some chatting quietly, others focused on their own work. One man whistles a tune that's been passed down 3 generations, though no one remembers the words anymore. The village dog pack unofficial, unbathed, and mostly unbothered trots by in search of scraps. They're neither yours nor anyone's, and yet everyone sort of feeds them. One of them, a scruffy gray mutt with only one ear, stops to roll dramatically in a pile of something that smells exactly how you'd expect. By mid-morning, your hands are sore, Your face is streaked with dirt, and you've earned a short break. You sit on a stone at the edge of the field, pulling out a cloth bundle with your breakfast, a piece of cold barley bread, a sliver of cheese that might be dreaming of going moldy, and an apple so bruised it might qualify as applesauce. Still, it fills your belly and tastes of familiarity. You chew slowly, eyes half-lidded, sun warming your face just enough to lull you into a sleepy sort of trance. A neighbor sits beside you, Marion, the weaver's daughter. She's eating a turnip like it's an apple, and frankly, that's a little upsetting. She nods at your bundle and says, "Luxury," with a smirk. You respond by offering a piece of bread, which she accepts with mock reverence. "Tell the king I said thanks," she adds. You chat quietly, sharing small gossip. Who's courting whom? Whose pig escaped into the mill pond again? Which monk supposedly snores louder than the abbey bell? You laugh, a little too loud, and are rewarded with a sharp glance from the reeve. Marion flips him a look that says, "Try me," and he retreats, mumbling about peasant manners. There's comfort in these small moments. You're not just working beside these people, you're growing, aging, aching with them. You know the names of their grandparents and their goats. You know who has the best turnip patch and who cheats at dice. Community isn't an abstract concept. It's the lady next to you elbowing you when she sees a beetle crawling up your tunic. Break time ends, as it always does, too soon. You return to your patch of field, the soil a little softer now, or maybe you've just gotten used to the rhythm. Hoe, step, turn, repeat. A meditative motion, interrupted only by the occasional stone, root, or mysterious object best not poked too hard. One time, someone found a Roman coin buried in a ditch and claimed it brought good luck. That same man got kicked by a cow the next day and lost a tooth. Historians still argue whether peasants believed in such signs sincerely or just used them as excuses for storytelling and free beer. You keep an eye out just in case. The sun climbs higher as the morning slides into midday, its pale light now bright enough to make you squint. A soft breeze stirs the bare branches lining the fields, and the earthy smell of freshly turned soil mixes with the occasional whiff of something less pleasant, likely the dung heap behind the reeve's shed. It's a familiar perfume at this point, one you've stopped flinching at mostly. Your stomach grumbles in that specific, hollow way that says barley bread is already a distant memory. But lunch is still a ways off, and there's more to do before then. Today's task list, as decreed by the manor steward's somewhat greasy parchment, includes mending a section of the hedgerow that keeps the Lord's sheep from wandering into the cabbage plots. Why the sheep are drawn to cabbages is a mystery. Why they seem to enjoy destroying the cabbages without actually eating them is another. So you head to the edge of the field, where a tangle of brambles, sticks, and what might have once been an actual hedge slouches in half-hearted defiance against the sheep's onslaught. You carry a bundle of withy sticks, thin, flexible willow branches that bend without breaking, and begin weaving them into the sagging gaps. It's slow work, the kind of task that makes your mind drift. You hum a little tune, something your mother used to sing while darning socks, though half the lyrics are gone and replaced with made-up words involving geese and, inexplicably, pancakes. While you work, you remember an old superstition. If a hedgerow collapses 3 times in a season, it's said to mean someone in the village will marry before the next frost. You glance at the woven wall and consider giving it a nudge, just to see what happens. But knowing your luck, it'd collapse onto you instead, and you'd end up explaining a scratched nose and a bruised ego to the entire manor. Historians still argue whether these kinds of peasant beliefs, omens about weather, animals, hedgerows, you name it, were sincere superstitions, or simply a way of adding meaning to an often uncertain world. Maybe both. When you're elbow deep in mud and twigs, It's comforting to think that even hedges might be trying to tell you something. You finish reinforcing your section and stand back to admire your work. It's not perfect, but it'll hold for now. A nearby sheep eyes it with clear intent. You lock eyes. There is a moment of mutual understanding and mutual challenge. It backs off, but you know this isn't over. Lunch arrives in the form of a loud clang from the village bell, echoing from the small wooden church near the center of town. You wipe your hands on your tunic, which is now more brown than its original gray, and make your way back toward the cottages. You pass several villagers heading the same way, trading weary greetings and half smiles. Everyone looks a little hunched, a little sun-blind, a little dirt-smeared. At your home, a low, timber-framed structure with a thatched roof and a door that creaks with dramatic flair, you find your family already inside, gathered around the hearth. The fire is modest but warm, and a clay pot simmers quietly with something vaguely resembling stew. You breathe in the aroma, onions, leeks, a hint of dried herbs, and possibly a leftover parsnip that's seen better days. Meat is rare, usually saved for special days or the odd chicken that stopped laying eggs. But the stew is thick, warm, and most importantly, filling. You scoop out a wooden bowl and sit on the bench beside your youngest brother, who is poking his stew like it might do tricks. Across from you, your grandmother sips slowly, eyes half closed. She claims to have seen 3 kings in her life and 1 ghost that looks suspiciously like the baker's late wife. Whether she believes that or simply enjoys repeating it is up for debate. Meals in your house are quiet affairs, not solemn, just sleepy. Conversation is minimal, consisting of grunts, slurps, and the occasional sigh of appreciation when someone bites into a particularly soft bit of turnip. You finish your bowl, feeling the warmth spread through your fingers and toes, chasing out the morning chill that settled deep in your bones. After eating, there's a short rest, a luxury stolen from the ticking hours. You lean against the wall near the hearth, letting the crackle of fire and the rhythmic breathing of your siblings lull you into a light doze. It's one of the only times you truly pause. No plowing, no hedging, no sheep staring you down like you owe them money. Just stillness. But it doesn't last. Soon enough, a shout from the reeve outside the door brings you back to your feet. Ditch team. Let's have it now. You groan. Ditch digging. This is for drainage, they say. To stop the fields from flooding, to carry water where it's needed. It's vital. It's strategic. It's back-breaking. And somehow, despite the importance, the tools provided are barely up to the task. You grab a blunt spade and join the others near the stream, where the earth is slick and sticky. As you dig, rhythm returns. Lift, thrust, haul, sigh. It's hard to make jokes with a mouthful of exertion, but someone at the far end of the trench tries anyway. Why did the bishop cross the ditch? They call. Because the devil was on the other side. It earns a few tired chuckles and 1 actual laugh from a lad who clearly needs more sleep. Mainstream historical fact. Most peasants owed a certain amount of labor to their lord each week, called boon work, or week work. You didn't get paid for it. In fact, failing to show up could mean fines or worse, a particularly stern talking to from the reeve, who might actually enjoy stern talking to's a bit too much. Quirky tidbit? Some villages had ditches with names like Piglet's Dip or St. Mildred's Gutter. Yours? It's unofficially called Muddy Regret, though no one will admit to naming it. You dig until your arms feel like what string and your legs like hollow reeds. Then the reeve mercifully waves you off for the day. You lean on your spade, catching your breath. Across the stream, the sheep have returned. Geraldine the goose stands atop a rock like a feathery warlord. You sigh. Just another afternoon. Your boots squelch as you walk back from the ditch, heavy with water and caked in layers of muck. There's a certain artistry to medieval ditch mud. Its ability to cling, stain, and somehow make its way up your leg past the hem of your tunic is unmatched by anything modern. You kick at a rock to loosen some of the clumps and nearly lose your balance, which earns you a polite chuckle from one of the elder women passing with a basket of dried rushes on her back. "Careful," she calls. The ditch claims more pride than it does water. You give her a sheepish grin and continue homeward. It's mid-afternoon now, and while most of the day's hardest labor is behind you, there's still plenty to do. You turn your attention to the next order of business, repairing the wattle fencing around your modest garden. A recent windstorm knocked part of it over, and unless you want pigs exploring your leeks again, an experience you're still emotionally recovering from, it needs fixing. The fencing is made from woven hazel branches, surprisingly sturdy when intact, but liable to sag and crumble if neglected. You fetch your knife, your bundle of cut twigs, and crouch at the edge of the plot. The garden is dormant now, save for some hardy greens and frost-nipped herbs, but it's your pride. You once managed to grow a pumpkin the size of a small dog, and it became the talk of the hamlet for nearly a week. Someone even tried to sketch it in charcoal, though the result looked more like an owl. While you weave the fence, you consider the delicate balance of rural peasant life. Historians still debate how much autonomy medieval peasants actually had. Some argue they were tightly controlled. Others say they had surprising freedom to manage their own small plots and time. The truth, like most things, likely lies somewhere in between, days full of obligation, punctuated by moments of personal rhythm. As you bend a branch through the upright stakes, the task takes on a meditative quality. The repetitive movement, the creak of wood, the crunch of frozen earth beneath your knees, it all forms a kind of rustic lullaby. A rooster crows in the distance, hours late or hours early, as is his custom. You think briefly about whether chickens tell time or just like the sound of their own voices. Your thoughts drift to food again. Not today's meal, but seasonal treats. Every once in a while, when things go well, no disease, no fire, no sheep uprising, you get a treat. A bit of honeycomb, a small pie filled with foraged berries, or if someone's really celebrating, spiced wine. A neighbor once threw a feast with boiled pears soaked in vinegar and sweet herbs. You still dream about those pears. They were gone in minutes, of course, swallowed by grateful mouths and washed down with weak ale, speaking of which, after fencing, you're supposed to help with ale prep. Most peasants drink ale daily. Not the strong kind nobles brag about in their great halls, but something called small beer, low in alcohol and high in hydration. Water, as you know too well, is a gamble. The ale might be cloudy and taste faintly of moldy straw, but it keeps you upright and functional. You duck into the ale shed, which smells like a medieval brewery, should sour, damp, and faintly hoppy. Inside, two neighbors are stirring the mash, steam rising in lazy curls as barley boils in a great cauldron. They nod as you join, handing you a paddle nearly your height. You stir slowly, carefully, trying not to splash your tunic more than necessary. The brewing process is both art and survival tactic. Fermenting grains into drink isn't just tradition, it's one of the ways your village stays healthy. Relatively. You take your turn adding dried herbs to the pot, mainly yarrow and wild rosemary, though one ambitious villager once tried adding nettles. That batch ended in tears and a suspicious rash. Quirky historical tidbit. In some regions, alewives women who specialized in brewing were known for wearing tall hats and placing broomsticks outside their doors to signal fresh batches. Yes, like that stereotype. Historians still argue whether this contributed to later associations between alewives and witchcraft. All you know is that old Bet from 2 cottages over has both a hat and a temper, and her brew is strong enough to knock out a rooster. The stirring goes on for a while, and you fall into conversation about the weather, always a lively topic. Too much rain last month, not enough now. Predictions are offered with confidence, then contradicted within minutes. Someone points at a cloud and swears it looks like St. Cuthbert frowning, which is clearly a bad sign. After the ale is set aside to ferment, you wander back outside. The sky is beginning to dim, not sunset yet, but leaning in that direction. The angle of the light paints the village in soft golds and browns, and the air has that clean, cool quality that comes before dusk. You stop for a moment, standing in the middle of the path, just breathing. You smell wood smoke, hear a distant dog barking, and feel your heartbeat slowing from the pace of the day. A child runs past with a wooden hoop, laughing breathlessly, chased by a smaller sibling determined to catch up. The older one veers around a puddle with practiced grace. The younger one does not, splashing through it and squealing with delight. You smile. Some things, at least, never change. You pass by the communal well and take a ladleful of water, not to drink, but to splash your face. It's icy and shocking, and it wakes you up better than anything brewed in the ale shed. You pat your cheeks dry and glance up at the thatched roofs of your village. Smoke curls lazily from nearly every chimney now. The night is approaching, but there's still just enough time to get in one last chore before darkness falls. You hear someone call your name time to help with the animals. You follow the sound of your name past the garden plots and out toward the low barns near the edge of the village. The air smells sharper here, hay, manure, and that particular earthy tang that clings to animals in cold weather. You're greeted by a goat who's made a personal hobby of escaping her pen. She eyes you like she owns the place, chewing slowly, defiantly, as if daring you to tell her otherwise. Your task tonight is simple. Help bring the livestock into their pens before darkness sets in fully. Most days, the animals roam in the common pasture just outside the village boundaries. But at night, they're brought in to protect them from foxes, wolves, and the occasional opportunistic thief. The cows, sheep, pigs, and chickens all need to be settled, and none of them are particularly cooperative. You start with the cows. Big, slow, and mostly gentle, they make their way in a lurching procession. One has a limp. Another keeps trying to wander back toward a patch of grass she clearly forgot she already ate. You give her a gentle nudge and murmur, "You've had your share, Mildred," though you're not sure if that's actually her name. The villagers tend to reuse names depending on how well the cow milks, and right now, you're on Mildred the Third. As you walk, you can't help but admire the cow's resilience. They're a lifeline here: milk, butter, the occasional calf, and warmth if you're desperate enough to sleep nearby on a winter night. There's even a local tale that a cow once kicked a wolf square in the jaw. Historians still argue whether that wolf existed or whether the cow's heroism was simply a nice bedtime story to tell kids on stormy nights. Once the cows are in, you move to the sheep. Now these are trickier. They move like a disorganized cloud of fluff with legs. They don't respond well to shouting, but they'll follow the lead of one stubborn matriarch, you think, who walks like she's late for a council meeting and slightly offended about it. You trail behind her, nudging the stragglers and rescuing one unfortunate lamb who's stuck in a bush for the third time this week. You extract him gently, give him a look, and whisper, "Try not to end up as stew. All right?" Sheep are a cornerstone of your life. Wool for clothing, dung for fuel, and occasionally meat, though that's reserved for rare feasts or when one dies of natural causes. Their bleats form a sort of evening music, high-pitched, repetitive, vaguely confused, like a rustic lullaby performed by panicked flutes. Once the last sheep is inside, You turn your attention to the pigs. Oh, the pigs. Medieval pigs aren't the docile pink cartoon versions you may be imagining. These are weary, smart, and often rude. One of them, named Thomas, of all things, has developed a habit of knocking over buckets just to watch people react. He snorts when he sees you, then promptly lies down in a puddle to make himself difficult. You sigh, loop a rope around his midsection, and begin the slow drag and coax routine. Quirky tidbit? Some towns in medieval Europe had laws requiring pigs to wear wooden muzzles or be led by ropes through the streets, because rogue swine could cause more chaos than you'd expect. One even led to a brawl during market day when it stole a sausage from a noble's cart. You wonder if Thomas would have been muzzled or knighted for that kind of behavior. As the last pig lumbers reluctantly into his pen, you close the gate and exhale. Your muscles ache, and your boots are wetter than they have been all day. But it's a good tired, the kind that feels earned. You check on the chickens next. They're already in their coop, huddled together for warmth. One flutters up to the perch, eyeing you like you've disturbed her mid-conversation. You lower the hatch and secure the door. You know foxes have been spotted nearby lately. One even took a goose last month, or so they say. Then again, that goose was old and had a reputation for wandering some suggests she just finally had enough and walked off into the woods to start a new life. You lean against the coop, staring up at the dusky sky. The stars are just beginning to emerge, faint pinpricks of light against the deepening blue. You try to name the constellations, but you only know a few. There's the farmer's ladle, and something your grandmother swore was shaped like St. Bridget's sock. Historians still argue whether peasants commonly named constellations or just borrowed them from monastic calendars. Either way, it's a nice way to mark the seasons. With the animals settled, your work for the day is mostly done. You roll your shoulders, feeling the strain in muscles you didn't even know were sore. There's still supper to think about, and maybe a bit of weaving by the hearth if your hands aren't raw. As you begin the walk back toward your home, the village is quieting. Smoke curls upward. Candles flicker behind shuttered windows. A dog barks once, then falls silent. You pass your neighbor stacking firewood and nod in shared understanding. Another day survived. Another day edged slightly closer to spring. There's something beautiful about this rhythm, though you'd never say it aloud, not when your feet hurt this much. But the cycle of labor, rest, and repetition has its own soothing pulse. You live by the seasons, by the stars, by the stubborn goats and gossiping chickens. And now, finally, you get to go inside. You push open your door and are greeted by warmth, dim light, and the unmistakable scent of root vegetables. Supper awaits. You step into your home, the wooden door creaking faintly as it closes behind you. The heat inside is a welcome shock, though heat might be generous. Really, it's just the slight warmth radiating from the hearth and the crowded closeness of your family and livestock. Yes, part of your house is still shared with the animals. The cow and a couple of goats slumber in a small, partitioned section by the door, their body heat contributing to what little insulation you have. Your boots squelch faintly as you peel them off, mud clinging like a second skin. You sit on the nearest stool and let your arms hang loose at your sides. Nearby, a child snores with their face in a pile of dried rushes. You're too tired to wonder which cousin's child that is. The smell of supper brings you back to life. Stew. Again. Turnips, onions, maybe a carrot if you are lucky in the last barter. There's also a chunk of old bread, tough as leather but better than nothing. You ladle a portion into a wooden bowl and settle on the floor near the hearth. The stew is hot and thick, with a vague herbal flavor, probably nettles or sorrel. Your jaw aches from chewing the bread, but it's still the best part of the day. Mainstream historical fact: most medieval peasants only ate 2 meals a day, one in the late morning, after hours of work, and one in the evening. Breakfast, as we know it, was not common. Dinner was the heartiest meal, often a pottage made from whatever vegetables, grains, and occasionally meat scraps could be found. Fringe tidbit: there was a folk belief that stew was better if it had simmered for days. Some families kept a pot going continuously, adding new ingredients as old ones were eaten, resulting in a sort of ever-changing ancestral broth. In one part of France, there were rumors of a soup pot kept simmering for over 40 years. You take another bite and wonder how long yours has been going. Hopefully not decades. Hopefully. Someone tells a story as you eat. It's an old tale, probably recycled from 5 winters ago, about a man who dreamed he was a chicken and then actually laid an egg. There's laughter, even if everyone's heard it before. It's not about novelty, it's about rhythm, familiarity, knowing the words before they're said and finding comfort in their repetition. There's a moment of silence. You hear the crackle of the fire, the soft thud of a ladle hitting an empty pot, the sound of someone snoring gently behind you. It's almost peaceful. Then someone farts loudly, and the moment is gone. Peasant life, full of beauty, full of turnip-based digestive consequences. The animals shift in their pen. You rise to check that the door latch is secure, stroking the cow's side as you pass. She's warm and docile, and for a second, you think about how strange it is to share living space with livestock. But it makes sense. In winter, their warmth helps keep the home above freezing. And in return, you shovel their dung out each morning. A fair deal, more or less. The hearth sputters as someone adds another log. Wood is precious, though. You only burn what's necessary. Some nights, you rely on peat, dried dung, or even bundled straw for fuel. Historians still argue whether peasants had regular access to firewood or if it was a privilege tied to forest rights. You know this. Stealing a branch from a noble's woodlot can get you whipped or worse. So you make do with whatever you can gather from fallen branches, scrub, and luck. Once your bowl is scraped clean, you rinse it with a splash of weak ale. Water isn't always safe to drink, so beer is the everyday beverage low in alcohol, barely fermented, but safer than a questionable well. You raise your mug and mock toast to no one in particular, and gulp it down. Bedtime creeps in as the fire dies lower. There's no clock to tell you the hour, but your body knows. It's sometime after nightfall, maybe the second hour of darkness. You spread a woven blanket near the hearth and collapse onto it. There's no mattress, just straw and your own fatigue. You scratch at a flea bite on your ankle. The blanket itches, and someone next to you is snoring already. You nudge them once. They snort, roll over, and keep snoring just slightly quieter. Sleep comes in layers. First, a haze. Then dreams that feel too close to real life. Digging fields, chasing goats, stirring the same stew again and again. But you always wake. In the middle of the night, you'll rise to add fuel to the fire or shift your aching shoulder. Maybe check that the animals haven't decided to start a midnight rampage. You lie there now, half awake, the sounds of your world filling the darkness. A cough, a creaking beam, the occasional hoot of an owl. You listen for anything strange, something that might signal trouble. You're always listening, always slightly alert. But mostly, your eyes begin to close. Your thoughts drift. You think about next planting season, about the shape of clouds earlier today, about that cow you saw licking the fence post for no apparent reason. And just before sleep takes you completely, you wonder how long the stew's really been in that pot. You stir before dawn. Not because of the sun, it's still cloaked behind the thick morning mist, but because your back has decided it's had enough of the hard, packed floor. You sit up slowly, bones crackling like dry twigs, and rub the sleep from your eyes. Around you, the house is still dim and quiet, save for the quiet snuffles of your fellow sleepers and the rhythmic chewing of your cow. The fire has burned down to warm embers. You prod it with a stick and add a few kindling scraps. Soon enough, faint orange light flickers across the wooden beams, dancing over cobwebs and soot-blackened walls. The day begins not with fanfare, but with quiet duty. You toss on your outer tunic and make your way outside. The morning air slaps your face cold, damp, and thick with fog. You can barely see your hand in front of your face, but you know this path. You could walk it blindfolded. You do walk it half asleep most mornings. The first order of business is a visit to the latrine, which is really just a pit shielded by some crude fencing and a few well-placed bushes. Privacy is relative. The smell? Unmistakable. Still, it's far enough from the house to be tolerable. The pit is due to be filled and soon a new one dug. You draw straws for that job. You're hoping to lose. You return home and begin your next chore, fetching water. The communal well sits at the center of the village, a decent walk away. You grab 2 wooden buckets and begin your trek, feet squelching through muddy ruts and the occasional bit of suspiciously squishy straw. Historical fact: many medieval villages revolved around a central green space with a well, communal oven, and sometimes a small chapel were located. This centralized layout made resource sharing practical, though not always convenient, especially in bad weather or if the line at the well was long, which it usually is. As you approach the well, the muffled sound of clanking chains and sleepy greetings fills the air. Other villagers are already queued up, eyes bleary, hair matted. You nod politely. Conversations are minimal at this hour, mostly muttered complaints about the cold, aching knees, or rumors that the Lord's pigs broke loose again. You wait your turn, shift your weight, and finally lower your bucket down into the blackness. The splash echoes faintly, followed by the creak of the pulley. You draw it up, the cold water sloshing heavily. You repeat the process for the second bucket and begin the return trip, arms already sore and the day barely begun. Quirky tidbit: some peasants believed that water drawn before sunrise had special properties good for curing ailments, blessing crops, or even driving away mischievous fairies. You once saw an old woman whisper to her bucket before pouring it into a stew. No one questioned her. She claimed her soup never burned. Back at home, you pour the water into a clay vessel by the hearth. It'll be used for cooking, washing, and sometimes, very cautiously, drinking. Boiling is safest, unless you fancy a stomach worm or 2. Your next chore awaits, mucking out the animal pen. You grab a crude wooden shovel and step into the hay-strewn stall. The goat bleats at you indignantly, offended by your presence. The cow swishes her tail lazily. You begin to scoop yesterday's efforts into a pile, trying not to breathe too deeply. It's part of life. You shovel, you sweat, and eventually, the floor is mostly clean. Historians still argue whether peasants cleaned animal stalls daily or less frequently. Some accounts suggest that the buildup of manure was sometimes intentional. It could insulate the floors during winter. You find that slightly believable. The line between laziness and medieval wisdom is often blurred. You toss the dung into a compost heap behind the house. It'll become next season's fertilizer, helping coax more barley and cabbage from the stubborn soil. You nod to yourself. Even waste has its place in the cycle. Back inside, the house is waking. Children squabble softly over a crust of bread. A sleepy voice asks if there's more stew. You grunt something vaguely affirmative and toss a few embers onto the fire to reheat the pot. The morning meal will be simple: reheated pottage and weak ale. As the heat builds, so does the chatter. A neighbor stops by to trade gossip, or maybe to borrow a chicken. It's hard to tell at first. You stand in the doorway, scratching your beard or your scalp, depending on your hygiene, and exchange pleasantries. They tell you the tanner's apprentice has run off again, this time with a peddler's daughter. You pretend to be surprised. There's a familiarity to these interactions. The stories may change slightly, but the themes remain. Someone's cow went missing, someone else found a funny-looking mushroom, and everyone is slightly annoyed with the reeve. You glance up. The mist is lifting, the sky shifting from gray to pale blue. Another day is calling. Soon, you'll be out in the fields, a hoe in hand, back bent and eyes scanning the soil. But for now, you linger. The smell of warming stew fills the air, and for just a moment, you're not cold, not tired. Just here, in your tiny home, in a village that will outlast you by centuries, whether anyone ever remembers your name or not. You slurp the last bit of warm, mushy stew from the wooden bowl, mostly barley with some scraps of turnip, a hint of dried onion, and a flavor that suggests meat once knew this pot long ago. The ale you wash it down with is weak, slightly sour, and safer than the water. You wipe your mouth on your sleeve, hand the bowl to your eldest child, and step outside. It's time to work the land. The tools await you, leaning against the side of the house, crudely made, but serviceable. A hoe, a rake, and something that once hoped to be a spade. You pick up the hoe and start your walk toward your family's strip in the open field system. Each household gets narrow, scattered plots across the village's shared lands, which means you have to hike a bit to get to yours. Nothing says cardio like peasant farming. The morning dew clings to your ankles. Your boots, worn leather patched with twine, are already damp. The smell of freshly churned earth and cow dung hangs in the air. Your field greets you like an old friend who never leaves. It's not glamorous, but it's yours. Well, technically it belongs to the local lord, but let's not dwell on that. Historical fact: most medieval peasants were bound to manorial estates and worked land in exchange for protection and small plots to grow their own food. While serfdom varied across Europe, in many places you owed a portion of your crops and labor to the lord, in addition to taxes and duties. It was less homeownership and more eternal renting with mild oppression. You take a moment to stretch your back, grip the hoe, and begin the rhythmic scrape of tilling soil. It's not planting season yet. This is maintenance work, clearing weeds and checking the earth for redness. Your muscles settle into a familiar burn. Your hands, already calloused, barely notice the blisters forming. Nearby, other villagers are doing the same. There's old Thoma, who talks to his scarecrow, and Greta, whose cabbage rows are weirdly perfect, possibly enchanted, probably just obsessive. You wave half-heartedly. They wave back without stopping. No one's here to socialize. The field is for labor, not leisure. Quirky tidbit: in some parts of Europe, peasants believed singing to your crops would make them grow better. You tried it once, croaking out a lullaby to your carrots. They didn't seem to mind. Your neighbor did. He asked if you were cursed. You replied that you might be. A cart rumbles by on the dirt track. It's the reeve making rounds, probably ensuring that everyone is doing their part for the manor. You straighten up, wipe your brow, and pretend to be industrious. You're already industrious, of course, but no one wants to be accused of loafing. The punishments for laziness aren't particularly brutal, just publicly humiliating. You'd prefer to avoid them. You keep working, hour after hour, breaking only for a sip of ale, and to shake the cramps from your legs. The soil is stubborn this year to wet, maybe, or cursed by that weird goose you stepped on last week. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants understood soil rotation scientifically, or just used trial and error. Likely a bit of both. You're mostly guided by your grandfather's superstitions and what the village elder claims to feel in his bones. By midday, your tunic clings to your skin with sweat, and your lower back is filing a formal complaint. You find a shady spot beneath a skinny tree and sit down to eat the midday meal, some dry bread, and a wedge of hard cheese, if you're lucky. If you're less lucky, it's just more bread and hope. A few children dart through the fields, pretending to joust with sticks. One falls into a rut and laughs hysterically. You smile. The same game you used to play, though back then you were certain you'd one day own a horse. You don't. You borrow the neighbor's donkey on special occasions, and it hates you with the quiet rage of an animal that knows your secrets. You lie back in the grass for just a moment, staring up at the slow-moving clouds. Your arms tingle from exertion. Your stomach is half full. The breeze carries a whiff of wild herbs and manure. It's not pleasant exactly, but familiar, comforting even. After a brief rest, you're back on your feet. There's always more to do. Stones to clear, furrows to deepen, scarecrows to adjust. One has fallen over again, either the wind or mischief. You prop it back up, adjusting its straw hat. You wonder if the crows are laughing behind your back. And then you spot something strange. A patch of ground where nothing is growing, no weeds, no grass, just bare soil. You kneel, run your fingers through it. Dry. Too dry. You frown. Might be nothing. Might be a sign. Or just bad luck. You make a mental note to ask the herbalist about it. She usually has some kind of explanation involving moon cycles or angry spirits. As the sun begins its descent, casting long golden shadows over the patchwork of fields, you gather your tools and begin the trek home. Your muscles ache, but there's a certain satisfaction in seeing the land shaped by your effort, even if only slightly. The peas sprouting in the next row over weren't there last week. You saw them first. You'll point them out to your youngest when you get home, with the authority of a seasoned farmer/magician. You reach the village edge just as a group of hens come sprinting around a corner, chased by a laughing child. The world is small, dusty, and repetitive, but it's yours. For now. The sun leans lower in the sky, casting a honeyed glow across the village rooftops as you step back into your yard. Your arms throb with the familiar post-field fatigue, and your stomach is already composing sonnets about dinner. But there's one task left before you can collapse onto the hay-stuffed bedding with your name on it, tending to the livestock. Your cottage shares a narrow patch of ground with a makeshift pen and a thatch-roofed shed. Inside are your most valuable non-human roommates, 2 scrappy goats, a waddling goose who thinks she owns the place, and a pig with an unsettling intelligence in his eyes. You swear he once judged you for tripping over your own boots. You grab a wooden pail and head toward the goats, who greet you with suspicious bleats. They're not keen on being milked unless bribed with wilted cabbage. You oblige. You've learned that the goat always wins. You squat beside the more cooperative one Mabel. You call her and begin the gentle rhythm of milking. The sound of the warm stream hitting the pail is oddly soothing, like nature's own lullaby. Historical fact: medieval peasant households often kept goats or sheep rather than cows, as they were cheaper to feed and easier to house. Goat milk was a dietary staple, though it spoiled quickly without refrigeration, something peasants solved by turning it into hard cheese, or just drinking it really fast and pretending the smell was normal. You mutter a lullaby as you work, partly to calm the goat, and partly to keep yourself awake. The goose honks disapprovingly from a corner. She's molting, which means she's moody and believes you should stay 6 feet away at all times. You respect her space. She's drawn blood before. After the goats come the chickens. You collect a few warm eggs from under fluffed feathers, whispering polite apologies to each hen. One pecks your hand anyway. You deserve it. She knows you ate her cousin last winter. Quirky tidbit: chickens in medieval Europe were sometimes treated as omens. If one crowed at the wrong time of day, or in Latin, somehow it was assumed something bad was coming. You once had a rooster that crowed every hour on the hour. He was named Bishop and did not live a long life. You scatter grain around the coop floor and check the water basin, which your youngest filled earlier. The pig eyes you from his corner with serene detachment. He's named Hamlet because your oldest child thinks they're clever. You scratch behind his ears. He doesn't resist. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants viewed their animals with affection or simply as property. The truth, as always, is muddled. You care for them, feed them, occasionally chat with them when no one's around, but you also know that Hamlet may end up on a feast table by winter's end. You try not to think about it too hard. You pause a moment, leaning on the fence post, watching the way the sun catches the dust in the air. The village smells of damp straw, wood smoke, and a hint of pig. You breathe it in like perfume. A few other peasants drift past, some hauling buckets, others herding straggling sheep. The communal life is full of noise, but there's comfort in the rhythm. You all know each other's chores. You all share each other's livestock drama. In the distance, you hear the church bell. It's not Sunday, so it must be marking the Angelus. You murmur a half-remembered prayer under your breath, mostly out of habit. Religion isn't just faith, it's woven into the hours of your day. Bells tell you when to pray, when to eat, when to sleep. It's like living inside a giant, divine cuckoo clock. The sky darkens to a mellow lavender as you carry the pail of milk into the house. Inside, the hearth fire is crackling gently, and your children are arguing over a bent spoon. You settle the debate by handing them crusts of bread and pouring some milk into a cracked wooden mug. Your partner stirs a pot of something that might be stew. You don't ask too many questions. The evening meal is sparse but warm. You chew slowly, feeling each ache settle into your bones like an old friend returning home. The table is loud with chatter, your youngest retelling a dramatic story about a goose-related chase, your eldest insisting they should be allowed to visit the woods tomorrow. You nod, hum, respond where necessary. Mostly, you let the warmth and clamor of your tiny world wash over you. Once the food is gone, you lean back, hand on your foolish belly, and gaze into the firelight. Shadows flicker against the wooden walls. The children settle down on their straw mats, whispering jokes and bumping elbows. You sit a little longer, stoking the fire, watching embers dance like fireflies trapped in orange glass. And finally, when the last mug is drained and the last complaint mumbled, you crawl onto the bedding. It's little more than straw in a wooden frame, covered in a scratchy wool blanket. But to your overworked muscles, it's heaven. You lie flat on your back, staring at the dark rafters, listening to the sounds of a medieval village winding down for the night, low voices, a barking dog, the distant hoot of an owl. Tomorrow, you'll do it all again. But tonight, you let your eyelids lower, and the hum of goats and children and history itself lulls you toward sleep. Sleep tries to tug at your eyelids, but you're not quite done yet. Your body might be ready for bed, but there's still one last ritual in the life of a medieval peasant, securing the house for night and checking the fire. You rise again with a groan, stretch until your back gives a satisfying pop, and move quietly through the one-room cottage. The air is cooling rapidly. Your breath comes out in faint little clouds, curling like shy ghosts in the firelight. The hearth, still glowing, needs tending. You stir the coals with a charred stick, carefully banking them with ash to keep them smoldering until dawn. Fire-starting flint is precious, and besides, who wants to wake up freezing in the dark? Historical fact: hearths were the center of peasant life, not just for warmth and cooking, but legally too. In many places, if your hearth was smoking, the land was considered occupied. No hearth, no home. You wrap the shutters closed with some twine, securing them against the wind. There's no glass in your windows, just wooden slats, a few tattered wool scraps, and the occasional bird that thinks it's found a new nest. You've named two of them. One sings at dawn. The other poops on everything you love. The cottage is simple, yes, but it's yours. The wattle and daub walls may crack in winter and lean like they've had one too many ales, but you know every creak and groan by heart. You make one last lap, stepping over sleeping limbs and scattered tools, making sure nothing sharp is left within toddler reach. You've learned that lesson. It involved a sickle and a very dramatic goose rescue. Your partner is already half asleep, curled beneath the blanket, murmuring dream words. You pull the covers over both of you and settle in. For a few minutes, you lie there listening to the snores of children, the grumbling of Hamlet the pig just outside, and the muffled whoosh of the wind brushing against your shuttered walls. Quirky tidbit: some medieval peasants believed that sleep came in two halves: first sleep and second sleep, separated by a short wakeful period in the night, often used for prayer, stoking the fire, or, let's be honest, sneaking an extra piece of bread. You begin to drift into that first sleep. Your body sinks like a stone into straw and wool. But before the darkness claims you completely, your ears catch something faint: hooves on the path. You groan softly. Someone's horse? No, it's the neighbor's cow again. She wanders like a medieval philosopher, no sense of direction, but full of deep, moving thoughts. You throw on a cloak, slip out the creaky door, and gently nudge her back toward her fence with the grace of someone who's done this for nights in a row. She follows reluctantly, like she's doing you a favor. You thank her anyway. It feels polite. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants were constantly sleep-deprived or simply adapted to the rhythms of their environment. You suspect the answer depends on how many cows they were responsible for. Back inside, your feet cold now from the dew-soaked grass, you finally get to crawl under the scratchy, comforting blanket and stay there. The children, in a tangled pile, mumble in their sleep. One of them lets out a whistle snore, like a kettle left on the fire. Your last thought before sleep takes you for real is a strangely comforting one. Despite all the muck, the blisters, the goats with attitudes and the geese with grudges, this life, this odd, quiet, muddy little life makes sense. It may not be easy, but it has rhythm. And somehow, rhythm is everything. You close your eyes. The wind plays a lullaby through the eaves. Morning doesn't so much arrive as it ambushes you. A low grunt from Hamlet the pig, a rooster crowing like he's auditioning for a one-bird opera, and the chill of dawn slipping beneath your blanket are all it takes. You blink groggily in the gray light. Your back complains. Your knees stage a minor protest. But the day is calling again, and medieval peasant life waits for no one, not even your aching joints. Today's task? Gathering wild herbs and kindling from the nearby woods. You slip into your worn tunic, scratch your scalp still itchy from yesterday's straw, and step outside where your breath puffs white in the cold morning air. The world is hushed, save for the crunch of frost underfoot and the occasional grumble from your stomach. Historical fact: Many peasants, especially women, were skilled foragers, collecting everything from nettles and yarrow to wild garlic and mushrooms. These weren't just culinary, many had medicinal or magical uses too, depending on who you asked. You strap on your gathering basket and make your way down the path toward the forest. The trees loom tall and skeletal this time of year, their branches knitting together like ancient fingers. A squirrel darts overhead. You eye it with suspicion. Last week, one stole your bread. The air smells of wet leaves and wood smoke. As you crunch along the path, you pass the mossy stump where old Nan swears she saw a forest spirit as a girl. You're not sure about forest spirits, but it is the place you once found a perfectly preserved snail wearing a leaf like a hat. So who's to say? You begin collecting herbs, some thyme, a bit of chamomile, and a stubborn sprig of rosemary that doesn't want to let go. Your hands sting from the cold, but it's strangely soothing. There's something meditative about gently pulling up roots and whispering to plants like they're coworkers you don't want to offend. Quirky tidbit: in some villages, people believed that nettles picked while holding your breath had stronger healing powers. Whether it worked or not, the tradition gave locals an excellent excuse for the grumpy silence that often accompanied early morning chores. Further into the woods, you spot a tangle of mushrooms near a rotted log. You pause. They might be edible, or they might make you see angels playing the lute on a turnip. And let's face it, you don't have time to hallucinate today. You leave them be with a respectful nod and keep walking. As you gather, you start noticing the signs of other foragers. A scuffed patch of soil, a broken twig, a perfectly round stone placed deliberately on a mossy root, probably a child's attempt at magic. You smile. Historians still argue whether medieval forests were seen more as sacred places or as dangerous, lawless wilds. The truth is probably somewhere in between. To you, they feel like both peaceful, but with secrets. With your basket nearly full, you loop back home. The sun is a pale disk barely peeking through the clouds. You pass a few other villagers along the way. One nods, another coughs dramatically and mutters about damp air ruining his humors. You wish him luck. He's always blaming the weather for something. Last week, it was a haunted wheelbarrow. Back home, you empty your basket near the fire and begin sorting the herbs. Some will go into soup, some will be dried and hung from the rafters, and a few you tie into little bundles to tuck into your bedding for pleasant dreams. You don't know if it works, but at least the bed smells like something other than pig. You glance around the cottage. The children are outside trying to balance on a log. Your partner is attempting to repair a hole in a boot with twine. Hope and aggressive muttering. You sit for a moment on the low stool near the fire and stretch out your legs. They feel like they belong to someone 40 years older. And yet, it's peaceful here. You're fed, the roof held through last night's wind, and there's a warm smell of thyme in the air. It's not a palace, but you'd take this over politics and powdered wigs any day. You close your eyes for a minute. A loud thump at the door interrupts the calm. You open it to find a goose, just standing there, staring at you like you're the intruder. You sigh. Some things never change. The goose stares at you with an unsettling intensity, then struts off like it owns the entire village. You shut the door slowly, pretending the interaction never happened. Back inside, the cottage is warm, cozy, and lightly chaotic. The herbs are sorted, the children are loud, and your partner is still in combat with the boot, which is losing structural integrity by the minute. But you have another task: visiting the village alewife. Not because it's a party night, though who's judging, but because you need yeast. Without it, tomorrow's bread will be flatter than the pond after a duck fight. You grab a small cloth pouch and make your way toward the edge of the village. The alewife lives in a cottage that smells like barley and vaguely of wet dog. She's already out front, stirring something in a massive cauldron, while yelling at a cat for reasons known only to her. Historical fact: in many medieval villages, brewing was a domestic craft done almost exclusively by women alewives. They were respected, feared, and occasionally accused of witchcraft, especially if their beer was suspiciously good. Sound familiar? Here for the yeast? She croaks, not even looking up. You nod. She ladles out a scoop of frothy, warm, yeasty starter into your pouch and tells you to feed it tonight if you don't want it to die. You hand her a small wedge of cheese and trade, technically a fair deal, though you suspect she just likes cheese. As you walk back through the village, you pass the blacksmith's forge. Sparks fly in bursts of light as iron clinks rhythmically against the anvil. Inside, the blacksmith is shaping horseshoes and muttering to himself in a way that suggests either deep concentration or an argument with an invisible horse. Quirky tidbit: some peasants believe that hanging a horseshoe upside down above your door let all the luck fall out. So naturally, entire feuds started over neighborly horseshoe positioning. You wave. He grunts. You take that as a heartfelt good afternoon. On your way back, you stop at the communal well for a drink. The bucket squeaks, the rope creaks, and as the cold water splashes into the wooden pail, you realize that, somehow, this feels like luxury. You cup your hands and sip. There's a faint taste of moss, but you're too thirsty to care. You pass the village notice board, a slab of wood with scratched messages, odd symbols, and one carved face that looks suspiciously like the Lord's cousin. You have no idea who did that. Definitely not you. Probably the goose. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants were truly isolated or surprisingly connected through trade, gossip, and church. Judging by the current debate near the bakehouse over who actually owns that one communal shovel, you'd argue connection very loud, very personal connection. Back home, the children are collecting bits of string and pretending to be noble merchants. You overhear the older one demanding 3 imaginary chickens for a pebble that smells like gold. You don't interfere. That's a solid deal. You set the yeast by the fire to stay warm and eye the flour sack. Tomorrow, you'll try to bake again. The last loaf you made was mistaken for a roof tile and then actually used as one for several days. But tonight's work isn't done. It's time for dinner, which in medieval terms means, what can we boil and how fast can it not kill us? You grab a few root vegetables, the last of the lentils, a strip of salted fish, and some of those herbs from earlier. You chop, stir, and taste cautiously. It's edible, which counts as a win. The pot bubbles merrily as everyone gathers. The children argue about who gets the biggest chunk of turnip. Your partner wins that round. You pour yourself a bowl and sit near the fire. The flavors are simple, earthy, faintly smoky, with a pleasant herbal finish. You chew slowly, grateful. There's something grounding about soup. It's not flashy. It doesn't brag. It just gets the job done, ... as the fire crackles. Someone outside sings a lullaby in a language you only half understand. The voice floats in through the thatch like smoke, and for a moment, the entire world softens. You lean back against the wall, cradling your warm bowl, listening to your family's chatter. Outside, the stars are beginning to prick through the dusk. Tomorrow will be muddy, and someone will probably step on a rake. But tonight, you're fed. You're warm. You have yeast, and honestly, in this century, that's a pretty big win. You wake the next morning, not to a rooster, but to your partner loudly declaring war on a splinter. Somehow, overnight, the bench turned traitorous, embedding a tiny wooden dagger into the sole of their foot. You offer a sympathetic grunt and roll over. But alas, Medieval life does not wait for your personal tragedies or sleep cycles. You swing your legs off the straw-stuffed mattress, stretch your arms, and immediately regret it. Your spine creaks like the barn door, and something in your neck makes a noise that can only be described as medieval accordion. Outside, the sky is that soft, pre-dawn blue, and the air smells like wet hay and mild despair. Time to bake bread. The fire from last night still smolders, so you gently coax it back to life with a few twigs and a lot of hope. You mix flour, salt, and yesterday's precious yeast, which has survived the night like a heroic pet rock. The dough is sticky, uncooperative, and completely uninterested in modern baking standards. But you need it anyway, because that's what peasant hands are for, making stubborn things useful. Mainstream historical fact: peasant bread was often made with a mix of grains like rye, barley, or oats. Wheat was expensive and usually reserved for the upper classes. If you were lucky, the bread rose slightly. If you were less lucky, it doubled as a doorstop. You cover the dough with a cloth and leave it near the hearth to rise hopefully more than last week's attempt, which was so dense it scared the chickens. While the dough does its mysterious fermentation dance, you check the rest of the pantry. The good news: you still have dried beans. The bad news: that's pretty much all you have. You make a note to forage later. Your mental list: wild garlic, nettles with gloves this time, and if the fairies allow, mushrooms. But never the red ones. Last time someone ate a red-capped mushroom, they tried to marry a tree and claimed the moon owed them rent. Quirky tidbit: some medieval villagers believed mushrooms were the food of forest spirits, and eating them without permission could anger unseen creatures. Which is a solid excuse if your soup goes terribly wrong. While the dough rises, you visit the chicken coop again. The goose is still there, still watching, still plotting. You collect 3 warm eggs and leave one as an offering, hoping to appease the feathery overlord. Back inside, the dough has expanded modestly like a proud puffball. You shape it into rough loaves and tuck them into the communal bakehouse basket. Your turn to use the village oven isn't until after the miller's wife, the alewife, and the old man who insists his dog is the reincarnation of Charlemagne. Historians still argue whether peasant communities were more cooperative or competitive. From your experience in the bakehouse queue, you'd say both. It's a delicate ballet of passive aggression, flour theft, and who remembers whose bread was undercooked last week. As you walk to the bakehouse, you pass the Lord's steward again. He's inspecting the barley fields and making dramatic notes in a ledger. You try not to draw attention. Peasants have been fined for smiling the wrong way during tax week. You drop off the loaves with the oven keeper, pay your tiny toll in dried herbs, and return home for your next task: mending. Clothes, nets, fences. Dignity, take your pick. You sit by the doorway with a pile of socks that haven't seen mercy in months. With a bone needle and thick wool thread, you begin patching. The children pass by, pretending to joust with spoons. You pretend not to notice when one spoon ends up in the soup pot. In between stitches, your mind wanders. You remember the festival last spring, when everyone wore garlands and danced around the maypole. The cider flowed freely, someone fell in a pig trough, and the goose disappeared for 3 days, returning with a suspiciously regal feather in its beak. As the sun climbs, your partner returns from the fields, hauling a basket of turnips and what might be a very judgmental carrot. You both laugh, a rare but honest sound. By midday, you retrieve your bread. It's crusty, irregular, but not a disaster. Success. You resist the urge to do a victory dance in front of the bakehouse, mostly because your knees would mutiny. You head home, your arms full, your face warm from sun and oven heat. The village hums around you, children laugh, Hammers tap, someone curses at a wheelbarrow, and a cow tries to eat someone's hat. There's no grandeur here, no sweeping battles or noble quests. Just cracked hands and even loaves, and the quiet dignity of daily life. And as you break a warm piece of bread and hand it to your youngest, who declares it not disgusting, you feel something rare, something like peace. The afternoon sun dips low and golden as you trade your needle for a wooden rake. It's time to tend the fields, or as you like to call it, the never-ending mud spa. Your feet sink gently into the soft earth, the smell of damp soil filling your senses a strangely calming scent if you forget about the spiders. You join the rhythm of the village, neighbors bent over rows of vegetables, children chasing chickens, and a distant bell signaling the hour. The crops need weeding, but you also need to watch for the occasional hare or fox who views the village garden as their personal buffet. Mainstream fact: medieval peasants' diet largely depended on what they could grow, forage or barter for grain, beans, root vegetables, and occasionally meat or fish, if luck was on their side. Your back complains softly, but you ignore it. The satisfaction of seeing weeds vanish is a tiny reward in this muddy saga. You remember the story your grandmother told about the fox who was smarter than the village, a tale historians still debate. Was it a metaphor or just a clever animal? Midway through your work, the village bard appears, an old man with a lute, thin as a twig and twice as sharp-witted. He sits nearby, strumming a slow tune, muttering verses about lost kings and the slow passing of time. His presence is oddly comforting, the music blending with bird song and distant chatter. You hum along, grateful for this unexpected lullaby. A gentle joke escapes your lips about how the bard's stories are so long even the crops get bored. You pause to wipe your brow and notice a group of village children playing near the well, their laughter echoing like a promise of simpler times. One of them attempts to catch a butterfly, but ends up tumbling into the water. The splash startles a nearby cat, which yowls in protest. Quirky tidbit: some medieval villagers believed cats were magical protectors, guarding homes from evil spirits, and possibly from drowning toddlers. As you wrap up your fieldwork, the smell of fresh bread wafts from the bakehouse once again. You know the day is winding down, but there's still work to be done. Returning home, you prepare a simple stew from the day's harvest. The pot simmers gently, filling the cottage with earthy, hearty aromas. Your partner sets the table, a rare moment of quiet companionship. The children gather around, eyes wide with anticipation. Tonight's meal is modest, but nourishing, a small victory in the daily struggle. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants had time for leisure, or if life was a continuous grind. Judging by the way your partner sneakily hides an extra piece of bread, you'd say moments of joy were definitely part of the package. After dinner, you settle by the fire with a worn book and illuminated manuscript borrowed from the local priest. The colorful illustrations dance softly in the firelight, a reminder of worlds beyond the village. As night deepens, the village slows. The geese finally stop their surveillance, and the stars peek through the thatched roofs. You close your eyes, feeling the weight of the day give way to rest. The fire crackles gently as you remain curled near it, wrapped in a woolen cloak that still smells faintly of sheep. Outside, the wind rustles the treetops with a soft, susurrating breath, almost like it's whispering secrets from the forest to the fields. You lean back, letting the warmth soak into your skin, your mind still half on the day's work, and half on something older than chores, even older than the village walls. You remember hearing once, maybe from the old bard, or maybe from a slightly tipsy uncle at a midsummer feast, that some believed certain trees could listen. Not just listen, but remember. Oak trees in particular were thought to hold stories in their roots. Historians still argue whether this belief came from Druidic traditions or was simply a case of poetic imagination, gone wonderfully out of control. Your thoughts drift to those oaks at the edge of the village. You pass them every time you carry firewood or gather herbs. They loom large, patient, and unbothered by your daily scurrying. There's a peace to them, a kind of stillness you envy. Speaking of gathering herbs, you decide to check the bundle drying near the hearth. A mix of thyme, nettle, and marigold perfect for teas, ointments, or, depending on the gossip, minor hexes. You're not much for spells, but you do enjoy a hot drink that smells like the garden. Mainstream fact, herbal remedies were a staple of peasant healthcare. Without doctors nearby, knowledge of plants and their properties passed down through generations, especially among women, who often acted as village healers. You pluck a sprig of thyme and crush it between your fingers, breathing in the sharp, calming scent. The cat stirs on the stool beside you and promptly returns to sleep. You envy its decisiveness. You pour yourself a wooden cup of warm ale and think of tomorrow, of the chickens, the fields, and the never-ending quest to fix the barn roof before it caves in. A light laugh escapes you. You've said that about the roof for 3 years now. It's become something of a family tradition. As you sip, you hear the faint sound of someone singing. A low, wavering lullaby from the neighbor's house, rising like smoke through the night air. You can't make out the words, but the melody is hauntingly familiar, something about the moon and harvest and the sea. Quirky tidbit, in some regions, villagers believed singing to bread as it baked would make it rise better. Whether true or not, many still sing lullabies in the kitchen, if only for comfort. You stare at the glowing embers, watching shapes form and vanish: dragons, fish, a crooked crown. Stories live in firelight, you've decided. Not the loud, hero saves the kingdom kind. The quiet ones. Stories of muddy boots, stubborn goats, and hands that remember how to heal. The candle burns low beside you. You pinch the wick gently and sit in the dark, feeling rather than seeing the room around you. The beams above creak softly as the night settles deeper into the wood. Historians still argue whether peasants truly understood the scope of their world. But you think they did. Maybe not in maps or measurements, but in rhythms, in the weight of rain clouds, the signs of an early frost, the first laugh of a baby, the last sigh of an old friend. You lie down on the straw mattress, pulling a blanket up to your chin. The cat joins you, paws kneading your arm before circling twice and curling into a purring comma. You close your eyes, and the wind keeps whispering outside. Your dreams are brief and strangely vivid: a goose wearing a crown, a dancing turnip, and the local baker winning a duel with nothing but a ladle. But soon, a cock's crow cuts through the darkness like a slightly off-key trumpet. Morning again. You groan softly, pulling the blanket over your head. For a moment, you wonder what would happen if you just didn't get up. Would the cows revolt? Would the sun file a complaint? Alas, the day waits for no peasant. You rise and pull on yesterday's clothes, which, to be fair, are also tomorrow's clothes. In a world with no wardrobe changes, you make peace with smelling faintly of cabbage and hay. Stepping outside, the air is thick with mist. Everything glows: silver trees, rooftops, even the sheep seem slightly magical in the fog. You take a deep breath. The smell is part fresh grass, part chimney smoke, and part something you can't name but somehow trust. Mainstream fact: most medieval peasants woke with the sun, aligning their daily routine with the natural light. Artificial lighting was expensive and rare in poor households. The village is just beginning to stir. A few neighbors wave sleepily. You nod back, resisting the urge to tell them about the goose dream. You make your way toward the communal well with a pair of buckets. The path is damp, and your shoes well. Technically, foot wrappings tied with string are already soaked. You mentally compose a complaint to the heavens, then forget it entirely when a robin lands on the well's edge, watching you with what can only be described as tiny, polite judgment. As you wait your turn, you eavesdrop onto women chatting about the upcoming feast day. One claims her aunt once saw a bishop dance until his shoes caught fire. The other insists she'll outdo everyone this year with her pickled turnip recipe. You make a mental note to avoid the turnips, just in case. Drawing water requires effort more than you'd like at this hour, but eventually, your buckets are full and your arms are longer. You trudge home slowly, stopping to help an elderly neighbor who's trying to chase a goat out of her vegetable patch. The goat, naturally, is winning. Quirky tidbit: in some medieval villages, goats were used as unofficial alarm clocks. Their morning mischief was often the first sign that dawn had truly arrived. Back at home, you tend to the hearth and begin preparing breakfast porridge again. The grains are clumped, and you stir slowly, pretending it's some grand culinary ritual. The cat circles your legs, hoping for scraps, while the youngest child appears, hair like straw and energy like thunder. They sit beside you, babbling about the feast, about the goat, about how someone claimed the moon fell into the well last night. You nod thoughtfully. Stranger things have happened after all. Historians still argue whether peasant children had formal chores or simply mimicked adults until they became useful. Either way, your child is handed a broom and pointed toward the floor. They make a game of it. Every bit of dust is a dragon to be defeated. You eat together, slowly, quietly. The porridge is warm. The room glows with firelight, and for just a moment, everything is perfectly still. No chickens, no mud, no sarcastic goats. Afterward, you step outside once more, water pot in hand, squinting into the dawn. The fields wait. The animals wait. The village waits. But first, you take one more minute. Just a minute. The kind of minute that feels like a gift, a brief pause in a life built on motion. You stretch your arms, yawn without apology, and smile at the absurdity of it all. The goose is still wearing its imaginary crown. You're back in the fields again. Always the fields. They're wet from morning dew, and each step in the soil gives a soft squish, like walking on someone's soggy bread. You've stopped caring how much mud gets on your feet. It's practically a second pair of shoes by now. Today's task? Weeding. Again. You wonder if there was ever a time in history when weeds just politely excused themselves. But no, they're thriving, smug little freeloaders pushing up through the cabbages. You kneel with a groan, back already complaining like an old gossip. But your hands know the rhythm: pluck, toss, scoot forward, repeat. Your mind wanders while your fingers work, which is probably the only reason you survive this kind of labor without going entirely mad. Mainstream fact: medieval crop fields were typically rotated on a 3-field system, one for winter crops, one for spring crops, and one left fallow to recover. This was a major innovation for agricultural sustainability at the time. As you pull a particularly stubborn thistle, your neighbor Tom ambles by, already missing a shoe and somehow cheerier than the sun. He offers you a bit of hard cheese wrapped in cloth. It's slightly moldy, but in that noble, aged sort of way. You accept it with exaggerated gratitude. I dreamed of dancing monks again, he says. You nod solemnly. At least they had rhythm. He shrugs. One kept stepping on the other's robe. You both chuckle softly. The breeze shifts, carrying with it the faint scent of roasting onions, probably from the manor kitchen up the hill. Rich folk, always making the air smell delicious. You pretend to cough dramatically, hoping to scare the smell away before your stomach remembers it's empty again. Quirky tidbit: in certain regions of medieval Europe, Peasants believed that singing to plants encouraged better growth. You try it for a moment, humming a nonsense lullaby to a beat. It doesn't respond. Typical. Tom moves on, and you're alone again. You listen to the creak of wooden carts, the buzz of insects, the occasional far-off clink of a blacksmith's hammer. All these sounds layer together, like a lullaby written by mud and iron and old hay. Then your dog appears well, technically the village's dog, but he follows you more than anyone else. He's scruffy, missing half an ear, and probably has fleas with their own peasant hardships, but he's loyal. He trots over and flops beside you with a dramatic sigh, like he, too, has been asked to weed this entire cursed kingdom. You reach over and scratch his head. You're lucky, you whisper. No taxes for dogs. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants viewed animals more as tools or as companions. You suspect the answer is yes. Time passes like molasses on a chilly morning. The sun creeps up, then sideways. Your knees grow numb. Your back stages a protest rally. Eventually, the bell from the chapel rings faintly in the distance. Midday. You stretch, stand, wobble like a drunk scarecrow, and gather your things. It's time for a break, and possibly a reckoning with whatever your left shoulder just did. You return to the village path, bumping into a small cluster of children who are enthusiastically throwing clumps of dirt at one another. One pauses to yell, "It's dragon poop." Before launching a particularly large clod, you offer a slow clap. A fine missile, brave knight. They grin, already reloading. At home, lunch is bread. Again. But someone traded you a sliver of pickled herring, and you slice it thinly enough to imagine you're royalty. You sit on the bench outside, chewing slowly, watching your dog try and fail to charm a chicken out of its grain. You take a long breath. The sun warms your face. The wind tugs at your sleeves like a child trying to tell a secret. For a few minutes, you allow yourself the fantasy that the weeds are all gone, the field is perfectly tilled, and someone else is doing the afternoon chores. Then a rooster yells at you for sitting too long. And you remember you are the someone else. Back out you go, because a peasant's lunch break is not exactly a leisurely affair. It's more of a brief intermission before Act 2 of how many tasks can one human endure before collapsing? Your next mission: repair the fence that keeps your neighbor's overly ambitious goats from invading your turnip patch. These goats, bless them, have no regard for boundaries, property lines, or the sanctity of root vegetables. You trudge down to the edge of the field, the rickety fence sagging like it's about to give up its earthly duties. A few slats are missing, and one entire post leans at an angle that suggests it's either deeply philosophical or just exhausted. You crouch down to inspect the damage, pulling out a handful of nails from your pouch. They've been reused so many times they're practically historical artifacts themselves. Mainstream fact. In medieval villages, wood was a precious commodity, and fencing, especially for communal fields or gardens, was often built from whatever scraps could be spared. Repairs were frequent and creatively improvised. You managed to hammer one board in place using a rock because, naturally, your hammer walked off last week and hasn't returned since. You name the board Sir Splinter and offer it a knighthood if it stays upright through the next rainstorm. While you work, the goat in question, whom you've nicknamed Benedict the Fencebreaker, stares at you with unblinking challenge. His beard twitches. His eyes squint. This is not over. You glance up the path and spot the reeve approaching the man responsible for overseeing the village and reporting to the Lord. He carries himself like someone who knows what everyone owes and probably what you had for breakfast. Fence trouble again? He says with a raised brow. You smile tightly. It's a daily miracle it stands at all. He nods sagely. Goats are nature's little anarchists. you consider getting that embroidered on a pillow. Quirky tidbit. Some peasants believed that certain animals, especially stubborn goats, were possessed by mischievous spirits. There were even folk remedies involving garlic, salt, or whispered charms to persuade them to behave. You consider trying one, but all you have is a pebble and a bad attitude. As the reeve leaves, you catch a glimpse of the manor's steward riding past on horseback. His cloak is clean. His boots shine. He smells faintly of apples and leisure. You tip your head in greeting and wonder what it's like to travel without dirt permanently lodged behind your ears. The sun begins its slow descent, casting long shadows across the furrows of land. It paints everything gold, even the weeds, which suddenly look artistic. You sit for a moment on the fence-post, watching the world soften. Historians still argue whether peasants felt genuine pride in their land and work, or whether the constant labor bred more resignation than satisfaction. It's probably a little of both. You care for the field, even when you curse it. You love the goat, even as he eats your shoes. Eventually, it's time to gather firewood before evening. The communal woods are just beyond the last field, a tangle of gnarled branches and mossy trunks. You carry a basket and a small hatchet. The air in the woods is cooler, laced with the smell of pine and last autumn's leaves. You find fallen limbs and dry twigs, stacking them methodically. Every crack under your foot echoes like a whispered secret. Somewhere above, a crow cackles, possibly at your expense. The forest has a mood of its own, half lullaby, half warning. It's peaceful, but with an edge. You keep to the path, humming softly. The same lullaby you sang to the beat earlier. Maybe trees like music too. With your basket full, you head back. The weight is manageable, but the path is uneven. You stumble once or twice and mutter something poetic involving your shin and a cursed root. Back in the village, smoke rises from chimneys. Someone's baking bread again, and the scent drifts lazily between houses. Children chase each other past you, laughing so hard one of them trips and somersaults like a very small, very muddy wheel. You pause to look at the sky. A streak of pink, a slice of orange, the moon's shy outline already peeking through the blue. Evening is arriving with its usual quiet confidence. Your dog, still muddy, still loyal, meets you at the door and offers a single wag. It's not much, but you accept it like a medal. You light a fire, stack the wood, and sit down with a sigh that could probably be heard 3 villages over. Today's tasks are nearly done. The fence stands, the goat is temporarily deterred, and your shoulders only mildly feel like collapsing in on themselves. Tomorrow will be another blur of weeds, hooves, bread, and sun. But for now, you've done enough. You lean back on the rough wooden stool, letting your elbows rest on your knees as the fire crackles softly beside you. There's something sacred about this hour, the in-between space where daylight has surrendered, but the hush of night hasn't fully taken hold. You shift your weight, adjusting the worn tunic that smells faintly of grass, smoke, and ambition. Supper is next nothing glamorous, but warm and filling. You ladle a scoop of thick barley pottage from the pot you started simmering this morning. A few shreds of cabbage and onion, maybe a whisper of pork fat, if you are lucky at last week's feast. You eat slowly, using a hunk of coarse rye bread to sop up the last of the broth. Each bite is a small victory. The bread is tough, but so are you. Mainstream fact, pottage was the go-to staple of most medieval peasants. It simmered for hours, sometimes days, being added to and subtracted from with whatever was available. It was the original fridge soup, except without the fridge or much soup. As you chew, your dog curls by the hearth, letting out a long sigh that somehow sounds judgmental. You toss him a crust. He accepts it like a king receiving tribute. There's chatter outside, neighbors returning from the fields, kids being wrangled indoors, someone singing slightly off-key. You open the small shuttered window to let the breeze in. It smells of damp earth and chimney smoke and whatever your neighbor is burning that probably shouldn't be burned. After supper, you busy your hands with minor evening chores, brushing dirt from your tools, refilling the water jug from the communal well, folding that one piece of passable cloth you own that isn't patched more than fabric. Your fingers are cracked, nails rimmed in soil, but they're steady, capable. You know these tools like old friends. You pass by your humble altar on a small shelf, just a wooden cross, a dried sprig of lavender, and a waxy taper you only light on Sundays, or if you need to impress guests, which you almost never have. You think briefly of the local priest. He gave a sermon last week on humility, or possibly sheep. His Latin was mumbled, and half the village was asleep by the final amen. Still, he means well, and he smells nice, like beeswax and mystery. Quirky tidbit: some medieval peasants believed in house brownies, tiny helpful spirits who would fix things while you slept if you left them crumbs or a splash of milk. Of course, if you offended them, they'd hide your tools or sour your beer. You're almost tempted to leave a crust out, just in case. You walk back outside to visit your modest patch of garden. The moonlight casts everything in silver. Even your slightly wilted leeks look poetic. There's a quiet pride in these few square meters of earth. Every clump of soil turned by your own hands. You run your fingers over the tops of the plants, whispering nonsense like, "Grow fast, or I'll turn you into soup." The fields beyond the village stretch out in dusky waves. You can just make out the darker line of the distant forest. Somewhere, an owl hoots. Or maybe a very confused goat. Historians still argue whether peasant communities truly felt contentment in their lot, or whether resignation was mistaken for peace. From where you're standing, it's hard to tell the difference. But tonight, it feels enough. A neighbor calls out a good night. You wave, not bothering with words. Your voice has earned its rest too. You check the coop. Your single hen, Margaret, is asleep. She snores slightly. You respect that. Back inside, you bank the fire and tuck yourself into the scratchy wool blanket layered over hay-stuffed bedding. It's not soft, but it's warm. And it smells like home. Dried grass, sweat, and a hint of last winter's herbs. You stare at the ceiling, counting the wooden beams, listening to the wind press gently against the door. Your dog has taken over most of the blanket. You let him. He's done his duty. He barked at a suspicious leaf earlier. Sleep tugs at you, slow and sticky, like molasses. You think about tomorrow's to-do list: early weeding, visit the blacksmith to beg for a nail or three, dodge Benedict the goat. Maybe you'll have time to repair your second pair of socks. Maybe you'll get a moment to sit under the tree again, where the bees hum like old friends and the sun slices through the leaves just right. But that's for later. For now, you close your eyes, the village quiets, the stars watch without blinking, and the world turns gently toward tomorrow. The darkness outside is complete now, save for the soft orange flicker from dying hearths and the pale shimmer of starlight. Your eyelids grow heavier, but your mind still ambles gently, not quite ready to fall fully into sleep. You hear a faint creak, maybe the wind, maybe the wood beams adjusting their ancient shoulders. Your home may be humble, but it's yours. Built with help from neighbors, a few borrowed nails, and a great deal of swearing. It's weathered more winters than you can count, and the thatch, though occasionally leaky, has a strange kind of loyalty. You shift under the covers, feet grazing the straw-stuffed mattress. It rustles like dry leaves. Somewhere to your left, your dog lets out one final grumble and promptly returns to dreaming about chasing things he'll never catch. Probably the pig. A soft snore rises from across the room, your cousin, or perhaps one of the children, curled into a quilt like a snail in its shell. The rhythm of their breathing is oddly reassuring, a reminder that despite all the aches, despite the blistered hands and the never-ending cold, this little life is steady, familiar, yours. Your fingers find the edge of the wool blanket, rough, scratchy, but warm, spun by someone you know, maybe even someone you love. It smells faintly of smoke and lanolin, and somehow that's comforting. Outside, an owl hoots. Just once, as if to say, all's well enough. You think briefly about tomorrow, about the turnips to pull, the hens to coax into laying, the rumors that the miller's wife is secretly making soap from lard and lavender. Scandalous. Sweet-smelling scandal. But those thoughts come slower now, softer, like footfalls on moss. You feel your muscles slacken, like bundles of old rope finally set down. You're safe. You're warm. Your chores will wait. Another creak. The fire sighs. You don't know exactly when it happens, when the waking world tilts just enough to spill you into dreams. But suddenly, the thatch no longer leaks. The straw no longer scratches, and you're floating somewhere between memory and meadow. The dog is still beside you. The snore is still steady. The owl has flown. Sleep, dear peasant, sleep. Let your body settle now, heavy and still beneath the covers, as if your limbs are becoming part of the earth itself, rooted and moving calm. The crackling fire has faded to soft embers, barely glowing in the hearth. Outside, the stars continue their slow arc across the night sky, watching with the patient indifference of things far older than any human tale. There's no more noise now. The animals are asleep. The neighbors are quiet. The wind has wandered off elsewhere. All that remains is a soft hush, the kind that settles over villages too small to be on any map and too precious to be forgotten. Let your thoughts drift gently, like leaves in a stream. Let them pass without chasing. Let them settle on nothing. You've walked the fields. You've fed the animals. You've faced small storms and tiny victories. And now your only task is rest. There's peace in simplicity, in repetition, in knowing that the world will turn again and you'll rise again. But not yet, not tonight. Tonight, you lie still, the weight of centuries above and below, cradled by time and quiet. Let sleep find you now, soft and slow, like footsteps across moss. Let it carry you gently through the last hush of night. You're home. You're safe. You're enough.